Hey everybody, I'm BadAsFish80. Welcome back to the Fish Tank, and today we're going to be looking at some update news for Minion Masters. We're going to be looking at patch 1.35. This is the second expansion, the second month in the 3-month Frost Dragons Lair expansion. We're going to look at the new cards, we're going to look at the balance changes, we're going to check out some bug fixes, we're going to look at a new skin, and hopefully we'll find some good stuff. Now, if you're enjoying the content here in the Fish Tank, please hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. Right, here we go. Frost Dragons Lair. So, as mentioned, version 1.35. This is going to be dropping on the 5th of May, which is tomorrow, if it is currently today. Now, as we said, new cards, new legendary skin, balance changes, and bug fixes. Now, the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the 2 new cards that are added. Now, here we go. Card number 1, Chief Icebreaker Bolf. Looks awesome, sounds awesome. Let's find out about him. Now, so this is a 6 mana legendary Stout Heart minion. So it's got 600 HP, so decently tanky. Does 100 damage, so 40 DPS, and it can hit ground units. And you can have 3 copies of it. Now, one thing to notice is its damage type is true damage. Okay, so as we can see, we've got some keywords here. True damage, and it also, as like a lot of the other Stout Heart minions, it has Revelry. And so let's have a look here. The Revelry says create a frost field on the ground. Okay, let's find out a little bit more about these key words, just to make sure we know exactly what's going on. So true damage. Now remember, true damage ignores any protection such as a shield, divine shield, or frozen. So that's very important because a lot of the new mechanics freeze units. Frozen units will take less damage unless, like this chap here, you have true damage. Now, Revelry. So this is, as we mentioned, this is a Stout Heart mechanic. If summoned close to another Stout Heart minion, or another Stout Heart minion is summoned close to it, it triggers a Revelry effect. Now, different cards have different Revelry effects, and Chief Icebreaker Bolf's Revelry effect is to create a frost field on the ground. But what's a frost field? Don't worry, I got you. So, a frost field. So this is an area that inflicts slow. So that's going to make any enemies in it slow, both in terms of their movement speed and their attack speed. Now, ground enemies that stay inside the frost field for 3 seconds become frozen. So this is similar to how if you're playing Rimagal, then the minions that you spawn are frozen until you've defrosted it, and of course Rimagal with its attack is freezing enemies. So this is frozen in the same vein. And just to remind you, minions that are frozen cannot move or attack and take 50% less damage or healing. But of course, remember that 50% less damage doesn't apply if your minion has true damage. So basically his thing is that he's going to potentially freeze the enemies, but also still be able to do his full DPS. One of the things we saw with Rimagal, the new dragon, was that it can freeze things, but then the freeze debuff means it actually takes less damage. So whilst you're stunning the enemy, it's doing a lot less damage, but not in Chief Icebreaker Bolf's case. Okay, so that's Mr. Bolf. Now, Bolf, of course, has a large weapon, as we can see here. This is what he looks like in the game. Okay, so that's the first card. Of course, we always get 2 new cards with these expansions. And our second card is the Snap Freeze. Now, Snap Freeze, this is a Stout Heart spell. It's a 2 mana spell. Has a range of 6. It's got a 3-second time. That's how long it lasts for. And it's got a half a second cast time. You can have 3 copies of it. Now, this creates a frost field on the ground that inflicts slow. Ground enemy units that stay inside the frost field for 3 seconds become frozen. So we saw, just now, we saw Bolf. Bolf can drop effectively the same frost field that the Snap Freeze does. So exactly the same mechanic with regards to that. So again, here we've got the keyword slow. So the enemies within the frost field are being slowed in terms of movement and attack speed, removing haste, of course, as well. And also, we have the frozen. So if an enemy is in the field for 3 seconds, it becomes frozen, where it can't move or attack, takes less damage or healing. So there's some nice synergy between these cards. So we're looking at freezing enemies and also using the both true damage DPS to ignore that frozen protection, if you will, because of the 50% less damage that they should take from normal attacks, but true damage ignores that. So true damage is something that not too many units in the game have, and a lot of people are a little bit confused sometimes with how that works. So the best example we can give you is Fanriel, so Stormcharger Fanriel. That has true damage. So if you've ever used Fanriel or played against Fanriel, you may have noticed that. So that damage, their attacks will ignore things like the Divine Shield. Even a Screaming Scrat will just get destroyed and not explode because the true damage ignores the outer shell of the Screaming Scrat and destroys the inner Scrat. And also, when it comes to face damage with Fanriel, we don't want to spend too much time talking about Fanriel, but just referring to true damage, you can't block true damage on face with things like an Apep Shield, because the true damage just ignores it. Right, so that's our two new cards. Snap Freeze was the second one. Now, as always, we get a new skin in these updates, and the skin in this update is a Volko skin. Now, I think if you checked out the progress in Remastered, you would have potentially seen this in there, I think, or something similar. Anyway, this is the Mech Suit Volko skin. So it is a recolor skin of one we've seen before, but this is a very nice looking one. Can't wait to check this out. Okay, so that's the new skin that we'll be looking forward to in the Battle Pass. And of course, one of the things we always look forward to in these patch notes, or these patches, are the balance changes. So as we've been doing recently, we're going to look at the buffs, the rebalances, and the nerfs. Now, the rebalances are things that have changed a lot or are not obviously a nerf or a buff because they've received multiple changes. Okay, so our first buff, King Puff. Just a little buff. Buffs no longer can be picked up by units without an attack. So King Puff's perk 2, where he drops the shield stroke rage puffs that can be collected on his side of the arena, they can no longer be collected by units without an attack. So little puffs, I'm not going to be picking them up. Ruffles, for example, if you're playing in teams, just a little thing there to stop those buffs getting wasted. Now we've got an interesting change here, Dormant Defenders. Now Dormant Defenders are now going to get haste. So remember, Dormant Defenders are the crystal constructs that spawn with Dormant, which means if you're not in Mana Surge, 6 mana or more, they will sit there as a building. Once you're Mana Surging, they will become a unit. So interestingly, that means that they're going to have Mana Surge, because they're just basically crystal constructs. They're going to have Mana Surge, which is the haste from that, and additional haste as well. So that'll be interesting to see what they're like. Next we have the Empowered Soul Stealer. This is a unit we've seen receive a few buffs recently. Remember, it now spawns with Rage. And it has a sacrifice mechanic where you can sacrifice the Slitherbounds to get additional stacks, so it increases its attack speed. This is quite a sizable buff. The souls gained per sacrifice is going up from 1 to 2. So now if you sacrifice 1 Slitherbound, you get 2 souls. So it's going to be a lot easier to get a very powerful Empowered Soul Stealer. Remember, as I mentioned, also spawns with Rage now, so this thing can be something that is very powerful. But of course, it is a bit of a glass cannon like DPS tends to be. Now a small change coming up to the Impatient statue. Cool Slitherbound, so it's going to get 3 Cool Slitherbounds instead of 2. Cool Slitherbound, of course, is the mechanic where you attach Slitherbounds to your other Slither cards in your hand, and then when you play them, you also get the extra little Slitherbounds, and then you can sacrifice them with other things. So, just a little buff there for the Impatient statue. Now, here's an interesting one. Kurnath Crystalback, one of the relatively newer cards in the game. Hasn't seen much play. Now, the Kurnath has the ability where it does damage when your opponent uses a spell. Now, this is going to be changed a little bit, so his ability triggers when anyone casts a spell, so that's whether it's friendly or enemy. Whoever casts a spell, he's going to do the damage to the closest units, etc. But the offshoot of that is that you can no longer use it to hit face. So that's going to be something that, whilst he's out, if you're able to use spells, then you can get some value out of him as well. Now again, another small change here to a Slither card. We've got Lash of Armoon, which is the spell that calls down the Spirit of Armoon for a small period of time, does a couple of attacks. Now this is going to gain Cool Slitherbound. This is going to have 2 Cool Slitherbound, so that's going to attach the Slitherbound, 2 of them, to another card in your hand. Just small incremental buffs to a couple of Slither-based cards. Now Magma Storm is going to get a buff here. So Magma Storm, of course, calls down a bunch of fireballs in a random place within a set rather large area. Now this is going to cool down 11 magma rocks instead of 10, so a small increase here. That may be because it's trying to keep it more in line with other heavy removal spells. Mountain Shaper got a buff and is seeing a lot of play. We'll see if Magma Storm. This can do a lot of damage, but of course there is the caveat that it does have a random attack pattern, so it can also do no damage. Now Rimmergal. Rimmergal, of course, the face of the expansion. Now Rimmergal is going to have an improved attack pattern. So Rimmergal has an attack where if the enemy stays in it for 3 seconds, it will become frozen. But if you may have noticed, Rimmergal's head goes from side to side when it's attacking. So what happens is that the enemy that it's attacking tends to not stay in for the full 3 seconds. So the attack pattern's been improved to hopefully make the freeze mechanic that it can debuff onto the stuff it's attacking a little bit more reliable. And hopefully that'll make it more valuable. So again, of course, we've spoken about the freeze mechanic, the frozen, where the unit gets frozen in place, can't attack, can't move, but takes less damage. Now a small buff here to Sunburn. Sunburn, historically over the years, over the months, has had changes where it does do friendly damage, it doesn't do friendly damage. It can get a little confusing. The current state is that the damage it does to friendly minions is going to be reduced to 50% of its damage. So Sunburn does 80 damage, it will only do 40 damage to friendly minions. So one of the things you can do with Sunburn, of course, is it rages whatever it lands on. So sometimes you want to be using it on your friendly minions, especially if you're clearing stuff around them. Now it's going to do less friendly fire damage. So a little buff there to Sunburn. Now we have a small buff to the Wrecked Walker. So the Wrecked Walker gained an ability in the last patch where if you had enough tech, I think it's 40 tech, it spawned with a Monitor Gnat, little flying ranged unit to support it. That's going to mean instead in the new patch you're going to get 2 of those instead of 1. So a little buff there for the Wrecked Walker. Right, that's the end of the buffs. Now we're going to look at the rebalances, which are, as mentioned, these are changes that are not necessarily a buff or a nerf, or there's just big changes. So let's have a look here. Now we're getting a change here to Milloween. So this is Milloween's second perk, the Arcane Missiles. So currently the Arcane Missiles are a card that's added to your deck. That's going to be changed to be a timed perk. Now you're going to receive that every 25 seconds. So it's going to be 25 seconds, and then once you use it, 25 seconds after that. Now the reason for this is that it's designed to be a nerf to really cheap cycle Milloween decks, because you won't be able to cycle quickly to that free spell anymore. And that's why this is kind of a rebalance, because in a heavier deck it might not be a nerf, might even be a small buff. So that's a change there to Milloween, trying to address the cheap Milloween decks a little bit. Now we got a big change coming up. Armored Escort. Now Armored Escort has been a problematic card for a while. It's been nerfed a lot, now it's getting properly rebalanced. Right, so the mana cost is dropping from 9 to 5. Wait, don't freak out. It's not just going to be a 5 mana Armored Escort. We'll find out. So what it's going to do, instead of previously where it gave you 2 Crystal Sentries with your next ranged unit and allowed you to bank that 9 mana, what's going to happen now, it's going to cost you 5 mana, and then you will receive a Crystal Sentry with each of your next 2 ranged minions. Additionally, that ranged minion, or those 2 ranged minions, will gain marksmanship, so that's +2 range. That's only for the ranged minion, not the Crystal Sentry. And it will additionally have mana freeze too. So that means effectively your next 2 ranged minions cost 2 additional mana each. So that means the overall armoured escort cost is still 9, because it's the 5 up front, and then it's an extra 2 with each time you use a ranged minion. So this is designed to allow you to not bank quite so much mana quite so efficiently, and also not allow you to just have this huge extra not free mana, but banked mana resurgence at one point. So we'll see how that is, and that could still be a strong card, but it should be more linear, that the benefits that you get from it. Right, so hopefully that makes sense. Big change, and we'll see how that becomes playable. Now again, a rebalance here. We got a big change coming up for Blade Star. Now, so Blade Star, previously it had a kill threshold, and it would go through everything until it hit something it didn't kill, and then it would bounce off, or it would bounce off the enemy tower. Now that kill threshold has been removed. It's going to bounce off all of the arena edges and all enemies, so it doesn't matter the HP of the enemy. It will hit it, it will do its damage, and then regardless of whether it kills it or not, it will bounce off. Now don't worry, this doesn't mean this is going to last forever, because I think it has a 6-second lifetime. So that means this thing can bounce around a lot, off of enemies, off of the edge of the arena. Still looks like it's going to be tricky to use, but potentially could get a lot of value out of it. Maybe, we'll see. One of the problems that I've had with Blade Star is that it's just far less reliable than a Wheel of Doom. A Wheel of Doom, you have far more of an idea of what it's going to do. Blade Star, not so much. Primarily because you need the bounces. Without the bounces, it's kind of irrelevant. We've seen sometimes the incredible situations where you manage to get it between a big unit and the enemy tower, and it bounces like a pinball machine and does copious damage. But of course that will still be possible, and you can even get that in different parts of the arena. But we'll see. I'm sure some people will have some awesome clips that we'll see of the Blade Star usage. Okay, so now we have a rebalance to Daggerfall. So rebalance because it's getting changed a bit. The way it works doesn't change, but it's going to do less damage but costs less. Is that a buff? Is it a nerf? Is it a rebalance? Well, it's going to do 50 damage instead of 80, but it's going to only cost 3 mana instead of 4 mana. Now, if you look at the damage per mana, then you'd think it's a nerf, probably for sure there. And one of the things that it's always important to notice is that when a spell is dropping from a certain damage to a lower damage, there's potential units that it can no longer kill that it previously could. So the Daggerfall with the damage dropping to 50 means it'll no longer kill Drone Buzzers, Vulture Prime, Bazooka Scrat, Snake Druid, Zeppelin Bomber, Zhao Long, Stint, and Jin Long. So there's some important things there that you could kill previously, but you won't be able to kill anymore. So we'll see how Daggerfall fits in. It's more kind of being designed here as a horde clear, not really removing anything of any particular substance. Right, and now again we have quite a big rebalance coming up to the Scrapyard. So the Scrapyard is the building. It's a spawner building for Outlanders, and it basically uses the tech you've generated from Outlander cards and then turns them into units, but it's not going to do it in quite the same way. So previously it would spawn a unit every time you got to 100 tech, but that's going to be changed to spawn a unit every 5 seconds. Now that means that you're going to have a more reliable way of knowing what's going to happen, when something's going to come out. That's potentially good for both parties involved. Now, you used to get a 3 to 5 mana random Outlander minion. That's being changed. Now you're going to get a 2 to 5 mana Outlander minion, but ground units only. Ground units only. That means it's no longer going to give you Vulture Primes or Drone Buzzers. But the offshoot of that, not necessarily a good thing, is that it's going to potentially be able to spawn a Stint or a Wrecked Walker, among the other stuff. Now, one of the things about the Scrapyard that was really strong sometimes was if you just got loads of air units out of it. that's no longer going to be possible. Additionally, it's been removed from the random pool, so you won't be getting that in APEP. I feel like that's already been done. I'm not sure, but that's definitely done now. So you won't be able to get that from APEP or a future or anything like that. So we'll see how the scrapyard is. I think that's probably overall going to be weaker because you're not going to get so much value out of it. We'll see how it goes. Okay, and then next up we have a change to a mechanic. This is the Scrat Swarm mechanic. So there's a number of cards. If we look here on the screen, we can see we've got the Bridge Buddies, we've got the Zeppelin Bomber, we've got Chisma Boomstick, we've got the Boom Buggy and Scratillery. These are all cards that have a Scrat Swarm mechanic attached to it. Now, Scrat Swarm is basically when currently, if you have 3 Scrats in the enemy arena, then it activates Scrat Swarm, and then that means something better happens with these cards. So things like the Zeppelin Bomber, you get 2 of them, for example. Boom Buggy, you get Marksmanship, and so on and so on. So the change to that is you're going to now require 5 instead of 3 Scrats in the opponent's area, but there's going to be a 5-second buffer. So basically you're going to need 5 Scrats within the enemy arena during a 5-second period of time. Now, this is kind of a quality of life thing, whereas previously it was 3 Scrats at any one time. So a card could be activated, then not activated, activated, not activated as the Scrats were moving in and dying, or you could have loads of Scrats going in but they're dying one at a time so it never gets activated, or it gets activated and then you try to use the card and by the time you've used the card it's no longer activated. So hopefully this will make this just a bit more reliable, so you'll be able to get that activation played nicely. Okay, so that's a change to the Scrat Swarm mechanic. Now, Shield Captain Avea, so damage reduction from 120 to 100, but no longer burns health on attack. So this is, I put this as a rebalance because it's kind of a double-edged sword here, because the fact she doesn't damage herself means she can't trigger her own shield mechanic, which is she can't trigger herself for her quest. The other side of that is that if she's not damaging herself, she's going to last longer and potentially help you trigger the quest. So, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And a similar change here to the Zealots of the Burning Fist. Damage down from 120 to 100. No longer burns health on attack. Not quite so much of a rebalance in this case because you haven't got the quest mechanic or anything like that. But they should, whilst doing less damage, they will certainly last a lot longer because they won't have that HP damage to themselves. Okay, so we've seen the buffs, we've seen the rebalances, now let's check out the nerfs. Right, we've got a nerf to Morelia. Now Morelia is a very highly played master. And it's we've recently had a change where her perk 3 is more expensive. We're getting a few changes here, so it looks like the devs feel like the way that she plays, her mechanics, everything like that seems fine. But to fine-tune her value just a little bit, definitely based on how much she's being played, win rates, things like that. They're just whittling away at that a little bit. So here her spellbook's getting some cost increases. So the skeletons from the spellbook now will cost 1 mana. The drain life will also cost 1 mana. So when something changes from 0 to 1, when you're using it, that actually puts you in a position where, although it's only 1 mana, you still want to think about, is this what I want to do, rather than it's a free thing, let me just do it and whatever. So that means all the options from her spellbook are now going to cost 1 mana, except for the spirits. So just a small nerf there, sorry, to Morelia. But of course, if something's costing just a little bit more, that's costing a little bit more each cycle. So these things can certainly add up during the game. Right, we have a change here to Blastmancer. Mana costs from 4 up to 5. Now, Blastmancer is a card that's, especially in duos, very, very powerful. I was hoping, and I suggested some things that could be a little bit more finessed with regards to changing it, and maybe we'll see that in the future. Mana cost going up to 5 is obviously going to make it just less of a valuable card, but also, you know, you're probably still going to get the value in a lot of times out of 5 mana. I was suggesting things like Maybe his range of detonation is not quite so huge, because boy does he get a lot of value. You know, let's kill the stuff around the thing that dies, but not everywhere. Of course, it's not like it used to be with the global range, but it's still a long range. Also, I suggested maybe something to do with the amount of damage the explosion does kind of drops away based on the distance from the attack. And also somebody else suggested maybe that the amount of damage the explosion does is dependent on the unit that died. So if you kill a Colossus, maybe there's a bigger explosion compared to a Scrat. But so these are some of the discussions that have been had. And of course, remember, these changes, a lot of these changes were trialed in the public test realm, the PTR, the public version. So a lot of people have tried these out and given feedback, and I encourage you going forward to get involved in that. Join the Minion Masters Discord, check out the PTR section on the left hand side in the channels, and get involved. So, you know, a lot of people complain when these changes come in. Why not be proactive, get involved in that process, test these things out, give your feedback before they actually hit the live game. Now we've got to change here to Jin Long. So Jin Long's only going to trigger when you cast a spell. So that means that it's not going to trigger when your opponent casts a spell. I'm not 100% sure if it's you as in just you as the master, or just you as in you as your team. But this should be overall a nerf to Jin Long, because your opponents are not going to become afraid of using the spell because they don't want to trigger it. But of course, there's some small situations where sometimes as an opponent, when you're removing it and you've got a couple of cheap spells, you use one to trigger it and the second one to remove it. You won't be able to do that anymore, but I think overall that's a nerf in most cases. Now, here's a change to the Sapphire Pebble. Sapphire Pebble has been very, very strong, especially in duos where you can wildcard it. This is a card that had both Myriad, so you get an extra copy of it anyway, and you could wildcard it. No more. Copies allowed from 2 down to 1. This is a good change, but I still think Sapphire Pebble is too strong. I feel like maybe the range is too long. It's very difficult to deal with efficiently. It outranges a lot of things, so watch this space. May get some more balanced love at some point. Of course, we did see the damage reduced at some point. That got reverted. I think that's fine. I think maybe just the range is too much. Okay, anyway, the next one. We've got a nerf coming up here to a card that we've seen a lot. The Scrat Tunnels. Now, the Scrat Tunnels have an ability card which is Emergency Tunneling, which means you can move it around and generate more Scrats. This was a 0 cost ability. It starts at 0 cost and then it goes up to 1, 2, 3, etc. They're going to change that now, so it starts at 1 mana. So therefore, again, once something goes from 0 mana to 1 mana, it's not just an auto, let me just do this and get a bunch of extra Scrats. Do I want to spend the 1 mana to do it? And of course, once it starts at 1 mana, it becomes more expensive very quickly. So currently, you could use it 3 times and it would cost you 3 mana. 0 for the first, 1 and 2. Now, if you move it 3 times, it'll cost you 6 mana. 1, 2 and 3. So I think we'll definitely see Scrat Tunnels, but people won't be moving them around quite so much because it's going to get expensive very quickly. And here we see a nerf for the Xiao Long. So Jin Long no longer triggers when your opponent uses the card. Xiao Long no longer triggers when you use the card. I've kind of explained that in the opposite way to how it's written on here, but only triggers when the opponent casts the spell. So you can't buff it yourself. You can't use the spell to try to keep it alive when someone's trying to remove it. So this is more going back to its roots, where it was primarily designed as an anti-spell tech. So that's just a little change there, and it's definitely a nerf. Right, so that's the balance changes, buffs, rebalances, and nerfs all completed. Now we've got some bug fixes. Right, let's go through these very quickly. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just the most important ones that I picked out. Emote resolution being too low, that's something I noticed, and that's been fixed. This is an important one. Xbox first match disconnection, that's been fixed. A lot of players on Xbox were finding that they were being disconnected during their first match. something to do with things taking too long to load and then it just timing out. So hopefully that's been fixed. If you're on Xbox, let us know if your experience after the patch tomorrow is better. Now, there was a problem with the adventure bundle gold cost. If you were buying a bunch of adventures together, it wouldn't let you buy them because the cost was wrong or something. That's been fixed. Now, this one has been around for a while. The Azog, not triggering Voidborn Wound. So Azog, of course, is one of the newer minions. It's the kind of the purple alien-looking guy with the shadow dash where it jumps around. Now, he should be able now to trigger the Voidborn Wound. Voidborn Wound, of course, is once a Voidborn minion attacks face. It triggers this wound on any appropriate cards. Now, the Diplomancer, Coax the Diplomancer, you probably noticed the Ascension counter above him was broken. This one was broken for a long time. That's now been fixed. Good to see we're getting some bugs that have been outstanding for a while, getting some attention now. Walking Blind Date. So this was when it got frozen by Rimagal or whatever other frozen mechanics were available at the time, maybe none. You would get no minion out of it. That's now been fixed. Ability cards staying in your hand after the unit dies. That's been addressed. The activation indicator on the Tantrum Throwers. That's been addressed. Yahoon failing to attack units above it. This is quite a long-term outstanding bug where if you had like a whelp right above Yahoon, he had like it's like his attack started a small distance away from him, so he would be just throwing rocks at it and wouldn't be able to attack it. That's been addressed. And there was a bug with Ardera. She could grant invincibility to units with a Divine Shield, like a Caliph or a Divine Warrior. So again, that's something that's been addressed. So a few really important bugs there with regards to the gameplay, and also we got the Xbox bug. Hopefully people won't be getting that disconnect at the start. Let us know. Right, so that is the changes. We've seen the cards, we've seen the balance changes, we've seen the new skin, we've seen the bug fixes. I'm excited to see what these are like, the new cards, and of course the balance changes on the gameplay in the game tomorrow. Drop by the stream if you want to find out more. Now, let us know in the comments what you think about these changes. Do that whether this is a case of you're responding to just reading the changes for the first time, or if you've dived into the game, checked out the changes. Give us your feedback based on how you're experiencing them. What are they like? Is everything working as appropriate? So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Of course, give us a thumbs up, all that good stuff if you're enjoying the content here in the fish tank. But yeah, next thing is we're going to dive in tomorrow and get some gameplay. This is Bad as Fish 80 signing out. Take care, everyone.